Midas is a character that needs no introduction in Fortnite. He is, without a doubt, one of the most interesting and complex characters in all of the storyline. But what people tend to miss about this character is right in front of them. Over the last few months, I've seen people berate and call this man a fraud, when in reality, he has done so much for the storyline, and many just ignore it because he doesn't always show up. But in the background, he's one of the most influential and powerful characters that we've seen in years, and even to this day is playing one of the most important roles in Fortnite history. But in order to understand where he is now, we need to go back and explain the true story of the Golden King. It all starts years before, well, his rise to power when he was a nobody, living in Helios, the home world of the Greeks. Due to a skin that released during Chapter 5, we know his home origin must be Helios, since, during the time of Greek gods, Midas was among these gods, not as a god, but as a king. In Greek mythology, he would get the golden touch for being greedy and turn everything he touched to gold, which is what Midas' entire character is around. In Fortnite's story, though, he gets it from Oro, a golden skeleton that curses him with a golden touch. Something Fortnite also does is something that Greek mythology tends to always include about Midas' story. He turns his own daughter to gold. In Fortnite's story, though, there's no proof that he's turned his child to gold or marigold. She never brings it up and it's never mentioned, so I assume Fortnite removed that part from his history and Jules is just his biological daughter. After he got his powers, we know he joined the Imagined Order, because in one of Sloane's loading screens, we see her as a child and we see Midas in the background, which means Midas was there longer than Sloane, proving that Midas could have even been a benefactor of the Imagined Order, a funder. With his unlimited gold, Midas could play a crucial part in funding a lot of the IO's resources and operations. It's probably why Geno brought him onto the Imagined Order. He could fund everything they needed, but also his calculated and mind were a great asset to the Order because he worked in the Doomsday Division. Now, I can't exactly prove that, but we can prove one thing. He worked on one of the Doomsday devices. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, we need to evaluate Midas. Midas's rich history is still unknown to this day, but I'm sure as the time goes on, we'll learn more about him. The parts we don't know are interesting because it kind of paints a story, but without some of the pieces there. Fortnite fans have had to put in the pieces ourselves, and hopefully Fortnite will reveal those pieces as time goes on. From what we know he was in the Imagined Order before Sloane or even maybe Jones. He could have been one of the earliest members in the Imagined Order. We just know that by the time of Chapter 2, he gets fed up with the Imagined Order and tries to destroy the loop. Maybe after years of working for them, he finally snaps and decides that kidnapping and enslaving people isn't the right thing to do. Midas may be a sort of anti-hero within the story. He's not exactly a good guy because he does everything for himself, but he has morals that Midas sticks to. And when he doesn't, it kind of deteriorates him a bit. Midas tries to play both sides in this story. He'll try and do what's good enough for him, but he'll also, when the time comes, work with people if he really needs to. It's like a double-ended sword, or a two-sided coin. The thing is, though, Midas knows what he wants, and he will do anything to achieve that goal. So, let us move on to Chapter 2, into the character's introduction to the storyline. Midas never appeared in Chapter 1 and was never even referenced, due to the story being built at the time, but Midas appeared during Chapter 2, Season 2, one of his most influential seasons and probably the character's most important season. He was the leader of Ghost, an organization bent on controlling the island. But then another faction grew in the Shadows, which was literally called Shadows. These factions used to be called Alter and Ego. This faction was run by a small group of IO members who had been sent by the Imagined Order in order to investigate the new island. But after Midas went onto the island himself, he took over Alta. But Shadow was run by someone else, Chaos Agent. Something interesting about Chaos Agent is he ran Steamy Stacks for a bit, and although there wasn't really much story, it was clear that Ego was playing a plan to take over the island. It's unclear if Chaos Agent was ever part of the Imagined Order, but I don't think he was. I think he was just a ruthless man who wanted to take over the island, a scientist bent on experimentation and the will of the game. And something interesting about him is what we learn about him later on. Because Chaos Agent is not all he seems. He's made to build up as this powerful scientist that his whole goal is taking over the island, when in reality he's just a puppet being held by the strings of someone else. Who is this puppet master? Midas. You see, Chaos Agent works for Midas as a puppet in one of his bigger schemes. We know that from the first Shadows trailers that Midas came to Chaos Agent all those years ago and hired him as a double agent to work with him within the island's parameters to essentially create a fake war. For what purposes, Chaos Agent didn't know. He just knew that Midas wanted a war with him and Chaos Agent was happy to oblige. We also know that he hired a few other members, like the Burning Wolf, an assassin for hire who he got on his side. The first Shadows might be Midas's special task force, people who will get rid of people who may interfere with his plans. We haven't seen them in a few years, and we probably won't for a while, but if Midas ever returns to the storyline, there's a good chance that we see him again. Hopefully, who knows. But as the war continued on in Season 2, it was clear Shadow was winning. But in reality, no one was winning. Midas was. You see, the war was one big distraction. The IO were focused on this war between two factions, and they couldn't care less. They were fighting, but it didn't really affect them or the 0 Point, so they didn't care. They were just observing. So, while they observed, Midas worked in the background to build a doomsday device that would destroy the loop forever and set everyone free, basically undoing the Imagined Order's entire work. Since Midas had made it clear he wants to destroy the Imagined Order and get rid of them for good. But unfortunately, Midas underestimated two things: the storm and, of course, how the 0 Point truly works. You see, the storm is connected to the island in a way we don't possibly understand, so when he tried to use his doomsday device to its full capacity, the device wasn't powerful enough to defeat the storm. So by the end of it, the flood happened and Midas would disappear. It's unclear if IO members sent out agents to take him down, but we can tell from the flooded trailer that he was eaten by a shark. This has debated some controversy over the years, or debates more likely, that was this a looper or a snapshot, or was this the real Midas? And I'm here to tell you, yes, this was the real Midas. This Midas was unfortunately eaten by a shark, and we wouldn't see Midas at all. And that would where we would spark the Midas propaganda. You see, people wanted him to return to the storyline because he was such an interesting character. There was a boat during Flooded that may have belonged to him, but people just believed this was ghost propaganda. In the same season, it also introduced his daughter, Jules, who may have been looking for him, and also trying to find a way to bring him back. But it's unclear because Chaos Agent roughly disappeared after this and did nothing throughout the entire season. And then we get to the collab season, Nexus War, which would bring on Galactus. But we're not here to talk about Marvel, we're here to talk about Midas. Because someone, we don't know who, I assume Jules at the time, resurrected their own father. Now, people also question, was this real Midas or was this a fake? Shadow Midas was in fact the real Midas. You see, Jules had used his chair in an ancient ritual to bring her father back from the spirit realm, or wherever he was at the time. It's unclear that if he was with Hades at the time, as we'd later find out, but she was able to resurrect him. Now, people just assume that after this event, Midas just dies again and ends up going back to the underworld. No, Midas would somehow be breaking free of this spirit realm control, which is where Midas Rex comes into play. People believe that some of his skins are just throwaway skins that were just made for the sake of it. Midas Rex was not one of them. Midas Rex was a suit of armor made to contain him after he was possessed and had all this unfortunate ghostly energy. But it was also called Midas's Revenge. Now, who did he want revenge on? Very simple, the Imagined Order. So, Midas would use these new abilities to corrupt loopers and turn them into shadowy figures so he could potentially start a war with the Imagined Order. But before he could even get revenge on them, it was taken from him, and his powers were slowly depleted, and Jules would break him free of this control. The only reason I think it was Jules is because it's the only logical sense, because after this, Midas would simply just disappear from the storyline and never be seen again. But that would not be until Chapter 3. You see, Midas didn't make a physical appearance that I know of. But we do know one thing, he was teased. You see, a restaurant east of Chapter 3 was handled by Jules, but also had his book of his doomsday weapon. I believe that after the flipping of the island, Midas went into hiding. And he would hang out with his daughter Jules. You know, family bonding stuff. Because it had his book about the doomsday weapon and everything was revolved around him. Of course, during the Resistance, there was an Easter egg that was patched, but I believe it was still canon at the time. You see, if you'd capture a certain point during the Resistance missions, the flag would turn to ghost, which is unclear if it was canon or not, but if you consider it canon, it means Midas was helping during the war efforts. And I mean, why wouldn't he? He already tried to defeat the Imagined Order once, so it seems weird that he wouldn't try and help the Seven take down the Imagined Order in a way. Even if he couldn't make a physical appearance, he could still offer them help from the side. Chapter 3, he would just not appear at all because, well, Midas didn't feel like appearing, I guess. He wanted to stay hidden from the Imagined Order. And afterwards, in Vibing, he really didn't have a place because the Imagined Order were gone. Then, of course, the Chrome took over, and he was supposed to make an appearance, but Midas scrapped him. Got scrapped last second. He was supposed to have a Chrome form, which maybe teased that Chrome doesn't affect Midas due to his golden curse. But we'll never know because Midas and that whole thing was scrapped. But then we get to Chapter 4. And Chapter 4, of course, he didn't really make an appearance in 1, 2, or 3. Maybe there were some hints and teasers through other characters, maybe some dialogue changes, but nothing concrete. Until we get to Season 4. Kano Thorn's season. During one of his little adventures, it's obvious that Jules and Midas have been split up at the time. Midas was doing something in the background during the Oathbound season, but nothing that was concrete or worthy of the full attention of the law. But during Chapter 4, nothing was going right and the law was out the window, so it's hard to say what's canon and what was not. We know Jules was working with the Oathbound, so maybe Midas was doing his own plans. Like I said, who knows? Chapter 4 story was everywhere at the time. But we know he appears in Season 4 because Kano Thorn chops his hand off. And unfortunately, Midas suffers from off-character death. You see, Midas tries to go up against Kano Thorn due to his, well, let's say, unique abilities to time travel. Unfortunately, Midas got his hand chopped off and killed, which is why he ends up in the Spirit Realm with Hades. Because that's the next time we see him. The next time we see Midas, his entire crew has been hunting him. They've been looking for him for what feels like around a year. And, well, it could have been a year or a few months. We don't know. The time difference in Fortnite's chapter and seasons, it's never been made clear. So maybe it was a week, month, or even year. All we know is, by the time of Chapter 5, Season 2, the crew has been hunting for him. And they eventually find him in the underworld of Hades. Hades has captured him for what reason? Well, that's what we don't know. Why does Hades have Midas prisoner? Was Midas once part of the Greek Pantheon, only to leave, betray the Pantheon to join the Imagined Order, which is why Hades has him locked up? Hades doesn't seem to like Midas for what unknown reason we don't know. Maybe Zeus considered him a threat to his plans because of how conniving and tactical he is. So he had him locked up due to his schemes. All we know is Midas would turn lava to gold and use that as his escape. This is where Midas' story was supposed to end. You see, his crew would break him out and they'd take over a ship that was taken by the Society, which, if we're all being clear, the Society could have been another faction of the IO or another faction that belonged to Midas. It's unclear, but it's very likely that Midas helped in building the Society due to his relationship with Montague, which was revealed in chapter 6 in some secret dialogue between the two. So it's clear Midas has some workings with the society, whether he was a benefactor or one of the founders of the society, which is maybe how Marigold found out. Perhaps Montague, who was on the island at the time, sent a message to Marigold saying that her father was on the island, and Marigold brought the entire crew of Shadow to come bust him out. All we know is, after that, Midas would set sail into the sunrise and would not be seen until the next season. Chapter 6, Season 2. Midas has a knack for showing up in Season 2 for some reason. Maybe it's because he was when he was most popular. This was during the whole Demon Saga, so Midas would arrive on the island to deal with an old enemy, Cain. You see, Cain was a wealthy business entrepreneur who had taken over the island due to his obsessed with gold, and well, gold-themed season, Midas appears. But Midas was here for another reason. You see, after disappearing off the island, he had probably found out about the 0 point and its unfortunate separation of all its shards, and probably went to go hunt for a shard and found out one of them was on Oninoshima, but when he arrived, realised it had been taken by demons. So when he was approached by Hope and Jones to help them take back the shard, he had no choice but to help them. This is where Midas and most of the community fall out. You see, Midas does his own things, and this is what makes people suspicious of him because of his works alone kind of thing. But that's not because he's evil, it's just because he knows working by himself is much easier in this situation. He obviously brought Brutus as his bodyguard, but he didn't even tell his daughter this time, due to how dangerous their line of work can be. So Midas has to work alone in order for this to work. So he teams up with Hope and Jones for the... It also helps that Midas has been working with the shards, or he knows how the Zero operates and wants to find the shards so they can put it back together, because he worked with the Imagined Order for years and probably has some intel on how the 0 point properly works. Hope and Jones hire him on the team, and of course this is where he becomes really helpful, because next season he funds the entirety of the supernovas. Him and Hope come up with a plan. They know that the shards are dangerous, and they decide that they'll need a place to store them while reforming the 0 point. This is where Midas shortly disappears, and people call him a bum because he disappears. In fact, no, you couldn't be more wrong. You see, the 0 point vault is created and Midas goes within it. He is there to guard the 0 point vault and make sure it doesn't fall under enemy hands. You see, the 0 point vault contains the 0 point energy, which if it fell into the wrong hands could be devastating, and Midas knows that. So he takes it upon himself to guard the vault, which is why he disappears. Then during the bug invasion, they disconnect the vault, so people can't get to it. And this gives them time to prepare. Obviously, they never ended up using it because they ended up taking the shard to somewhere else, which was the Golden Coast in Loop Labs, until it turned into Lethal Labs. But that is where Midas currently is. He's in the vault, making sure the 0 point energy is protected, and when the time comes, he will return to the storyline, because Midas' story is still ongoing, and there's so many questions still about him that we need to know. But whether you like it or not, Midas has played an crucial role to the storyline, from chapter 2 to even now. His roles might have been small, but his impact was massive. And that has been the story of the Golden King, a man so influential and powerful that sometimes his greatest mind is his own strength. That didn't make sense, but you get what I'm coming from. Point is, Midas is important to the storyline, and eventually his return will be important. That's all for today, folks. Hope you've enjoyed today's video, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.